I've been getting up on its own at 5:30.
Yeah, that's, Peyton does pretty good.
Count is not one. I've been letting them drive,
Yeah.
so I've been getting up.
Well, we got another year. For 2 months, till the end of June, so, or till the end.
That's $1.
50 cents to use it, $1 to keep it?
We got 7. Almost
6.
All right, go ahead and call the meeting to order. Thanks for everybody for being here for the special meeting. I'll start with the approval of the agenda as written. Motion by Rogers, second by Tamara. All in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes. And board discussion, superintendent discussion with Jason first.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go over the survey. I got good news. You had 181 respondents to your survey. So for the quick turnaround that you had, I'd say that was fantastic. So congratulations to your communities on that. I'm gonna, if you could pass those out. And Jane, I think there's enough for you, but I think you pass them out. So with that said, I'd like to review the respondent or the responses from the 181. If you have it in your hands, you can see that of the 181, almost 30% of them identify as a community member, 27% as a parent or a guardian of a student, which obviously means they're community members, but a little bit more specific. An employee with the district, almost 20%. An employee would be not a teacher, because you can see teacher has a separate category. So an employee would be your classified staff members. Teachers, you had 18%. It was nice to see you had 9 students that took the time to respond to this, and 1 of your administrators within the district responded. The second question, or the second page, which is on the back, this is simply how long you've been associated with the school district and or your community. As you can see, 49% have been in your community or your district 20 plus years. I've done dozens upon dozens of these surveys. That's always the number one response. So those that are in your community, this is kind of conjecture, but have the most interest. So they obviously want to make sure their voices are heard. With 4 to 10 years, you can see almost 23%, 11 to 20, 19%, 1 to 3, 7, and less than a year. That makes sense that they're probably not vested in your community quite as much when they're less, so you can see we have less respondents. So getting into the brass tacks, if you look at question 3, and you can see that happens to be on page 3 of 11, these are the personal qualities that you would like to see in your new superintendent. If I was doing face-to-face focus groups, they're more open-ended. It's a little more difficult to do that on online surveys, so we provided 8 responses that are pretty common, and we asked those respondents to prioritize those 1 through 8. So as you can see, if you look on the far right is what we will call a power score. I will tell you that very seldom do I see a power score of 6 or higher. So you have 2 responses on this one that are above 6. So that is personal strength to do what's right regardless of circumstances. And now I want you to notice 181 people responded, but only 125 answered this question. So 41% that responded to this had that as their number 1 priority. So do you see how that's working so far? And then number 2 is kids' first personality. Now, although that is a very high power score, it's still number 2. And interestingly, only 22% had that as their first priority. Now, you might see that the second highest power score might have a higher percent as having that as their number 1 priority. So you might be checking those percents. Now, the others are still important because obviously people prioritize these, but there's quite a bit of jump between 6.03 and a 5.03. So it still could be important to you, but I just noted the top 2 because they kind of stood out. So as a board, I would really appreciate, do these responses surprise you? Is there something in here you go, no, that's exactly what I would have thought if I was doing it? Or is there something you want me to know about these responses? Because ultimately you folks are the ones that get to really do the prioritization. Any comments or questions about that particular question? Do you feel comfortable, I guess, for nothing surprises there?
Yeah, it's all common sense.
Yeah. Okay. Question number 4, these are the leadership qualities. And once again, there's 8 that they prioritized from. You did, once again, had a power score over 6. There's sometimes I do this and there's no power scores over 6 on any of these questions. And you've got 3 of them just within the first 2 questions. So an efficient manager of resources and budget. So you can see that's your top with the 6.23. Almost 35% of your respondents had that as their number 1 priority. A proactive forward thinker was number 2 with a pretty high power score, but only 17% had it as their number 1 priority. And then third is community oriented and involved in the community. And you can see their power score is similar to number 2 and pretty similar on the number 1 if you look at how many had that as number 1. So once again, I'd sure appreciate any comments that you might have that you as a board feel comfortable with what you're seeing there, or I wish something was higher.
I think the efficient manager of resources and budget aligns with the results of the discussions we've had
Yeah.
in the committee.
Yeah, I would
So
fully
that's-
expect to see that
Yeah.
one really high here. As I said, I've done dozens and dozens of these. That one's usually fairly high, but it's never that high. So that probably is a telling indicator for you folks. So you're right on track, I would say. Question 5 is the identified experiences that you would like your new superintendent to have. And once again, you can see, I think these two are very similar. This is experience with business and the operations of a school district. So it wasn't over 6, but 6 is really high. So 5.3 is pretty high. And then number 2 is previous superintendent experience, 549. And then a pretty good split between number 2 and 3. So I've just highlighted the first one and the second one. That doesn't mean that the others are not important to you, but that would be once again something I'd want you to tell me. So number 1 and number 2 I see as fairly similar. That obviously if you have previous superintendent experience, you're going to have experience with the business operations of the school. And I do also think that that ties in with your number 1 priority on the previous question. Any comments from the board that would like to add anything to that one? Now, everybody is waiting for question 6 because this is the open-ended questions. This is where everybody has their opportunity to take a shot because they don't have to say their name. But I will absolutely say this, and I don't always get to say this to boards. A lot of times I will come to you and redact some statements because there's been individual names. I did not have to redact one comment in here. Now, there might be something that you guess who they're talking about, but there's not one name in here. I will tell you, after reading through here, most of it is the discussion on the split between your district, the fracture, said it in different words between north and south. I don't think that would surprise you, but I would guess 75% of the comments in here had something to do with that type of thing. I don't plan on going through all of these with you, but I do think it would be important for you as individuals to read those at some point. I'll let you peruse that just a little bit before we go on, just so you know that I'm not kidding you. When I redact statements, I usually give the board the unredacted so you'll know what, because it's your information, but if the public wants to see it, you have the redacted version that you could hand to them. And Mr. Shermeyer, if it's okay, I will continue, and you guys can peruse that if you want to keep looking or look at it your own time. Question 7, which is the last question. What would be the single quality or characteristic that would separate one candidate from other candidates? So it had to be one, and I will tell you that your number one response has never not been the number one response. So it's what we all want as employers, is an honest, trustworthy, and somebody with strong integrity that we figure can become really good employees. But number 2 is a little bit unusual, but it does absolutely match some of your other responses, which is the fiscal operations management expertise. So that's not typically that high, but it didn't shock me here, just simply knowing what the responses of your other questions were. So before we go to something new, I guess any comments to say, Gary, if you were fortunate enough to get some quality candidates, do these characteristics seem to be what you would want me to be screening for, or are there things in there that you would also want me to be looking for?
Gary, you mind talking about the number 7 on
You do not have a number 7? Take mine. So, Mr. Shermeyer, may I continue?
Sure.
All right. I'd like to go over the superintendent salary comparison so that you'll have an opportunity. We do not get into the negotiations of this, but we do want you as a board to have good information so that you're comfortable when you offer a package to a superintendent candidate. So I'd like to review this with you and understand so that you have a good understanding of what you are looking at. The columns are important. Some of them are very obvious. They don't need any explanation, but I'm going to anyway. A, of course, is the USD number. B is the name. C is the reported enrollment. D is the year we have that information. So 21-22 means current information. So obviously Diane has done a good job there, but you may see a couple of years that are not up to date. So if they were all up to date, it might change the information, so just be aware of that. Column E is the base salary. So that has been queried and filtered from lowest to highest using column E, because that's a known number. The next column is their yearly fringe benefit. And the reason I don't want to, and then the next column, of course, is the total of those two columns. I don't filter it using that because we never know for sure what their fringe benefit is. You can almost guarantee it's health insurance, but there could be car expenses in there. There could be professional dues, whatever some superintendents may have in their contracts. So I do want you to know it's filtered using base salary. H, column H is the following. That's your CASA classification. I is if they are an interim superintendent. So if you would happen to see a yes anywhere on here, that means that particular person is an interim. J is if they are capers retired or otherwise double dipping. So if you would happen to see a yes, they are a capers retired superintendent. K means that they're also performing principal duties. So you may or may not see a yes in there at times. L is the number of years they have been a superintendent in that district. The next column is the number of total years they've been a superintendent. So if I was a superintendent in your district for 6 years and 6 years in another district, there would be a 12 on that column. And the very last column is the number of days in their contract. So if you look at the very top one, Kiowa County has a 240-day contract. Obviously, you don't work Saturday and Sundays theoretically, even though administrators do on occasion. Holidays, those types of things. If you happen to see a 365-day contract, that's probably interpreted because they didn't have another way. It's a 12-month contract, and then they just get designated holidays and vacations. So if you look at the very first graph there, Central Plains is right in the middle by design. So of your current salary, you can see in column E, there's 15 salaries or districts that are directly lower salaries are the ones that are physically above your number. The 15 salaries that are directly higher are below that on the paper. So you've got 31 districts that are most closely clustered with your salary. May or may not be good information, but if you look at enrollment, CASA classification, those types of things, you'll see, hey, there's some 1As in here, there's some 3As, that sort of thing. Of course, the Central Prairie, your activities league, most boards really like that information because you identify with those districts maybe more than others. I also know that you only have one high school that happens to be in that, so you can see where you stand in that particular district. And then the Northern Plains, I am not sure why. I know Wilson is in that, but Wilson's not listed in our databases in that. So I went ahead and provided the Northern Plains League for you, and obviously your salary's not in there, but you could see where it would stand up. Those are obviously a little bit smaller school districts, so may or may not be good information for you. Because it's hard to classify your district because you have two high schools, I've done two different queries for you. I've done all of the school districts that have enrollments between 301 and 600. You have 440, so kind of in the middle, so that you can see that. And then the very last one is all the 2A, because your enrollment would match a 2A school district typically. So every 2A school in the whole state is also listed there on the very last page. And obviously you're not in there because you don't have a classification in that, but it's easy for you to reference. Any questions or comments about this? Okay. I'm going to continue. Before we go too much further, because of the position I'm in, I get a lot of information from other districts, and I am also doing two other superintendent searches. And Republic County is a week ahead of you. And originally that was by design because you were a week behind when your superintendent search came up. Because you may be getting similar candidates, I would suggest to this board that you allow me to make your deadline for application go from June 23rd to the 16th, which is the exact same day. That date's not important to you really. But if you would do that, there's some rationale behind that, is now I have, the next time I would meet with you would be June 28th, which means some other districts have already heard from me a week in advance, and you may have similar candidates. So I'm recommending that I would meet with you on June 20 as opposed to June 28th. And if we can't make the 20th work, I'm sorry, because that's the only date I'm available to come visit with you. Which then means if you are fortunate to have candidates for interview, you would probably want to interview them that same week that another district is, which would be the 21st through whatever. I hope you understand my rationale. I think it's to your advantage if you're able to do that.
Makes sense to me.
So it would be the 20th that I would be able to, that I would see you next. Okay. Now I guess
Issues with that, does any board member have an issue with it?
I'm good.
the worst case scenario would be you don't have any candidates. I would probably call Mr. Schiermeyer and say you don't have any candidates. There's no reason for me to come unless you want me to say what do we need to do now. Or I might say you had two, and I honestly can't recommend any of you, so it'd be a waste of your time to interview them. But I'll be happy to come and talk to you about them. But it's always your decision whether I recommend them or not. But I'll plan on being here the 20th unless there's no candidates and you say I still want you to come because we need to get together and talk about next course of action. I would recommend to you that you still have your conversations with potential interim candidates. We've talked about that before, so that you have a backup plan if we unfortunately would not get a suitable candidate to interview, that you have a backup plan. I will, this evening or first thing tomorrow, change the posting on our website from June 23rd to June 16th as the deadline. And there's not been anybody reach out to me at this particular point. If there would have been, I would reach out to them just to make sure they knew that we were changing the deadline. Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. The next thing we need to talk about, and these are if we would have interview candidates, is how you wish to go about that. There are interview questions that you need to identify. There's usually a process that I would have you go through, but it takes a little bit of time, and not just tonight. It would take you maybe 3 to 5 days to look through them and then send them to, point at you, but Diane probably, and she would collate them. I took the liberty of bringing, we always recommend 21 questions, so that would be 3 questions from each board member. So it's pretty even. It's a 2 to 2.5 hour interview. I have requested 2 districts that have already gone through this process earlier in the year to send me the 21 questions their board chose. That doesn't mean you'll like them. You might want to look at the 90 that are in the back of your manual and choose the 21. If we were going to go through the process, what I would, Allison, I'm going to use you as an example. You'd look through those 90 questions, choose the 21 you would hope to ask, or if you were the only board member, this would be the 21 I would ask. You would do the same thing. Send your 21 questions to Diane. I've got them in electronic format, so you don't have to write them. You can simply say question 2, 6, 9. And then she goes through 7 board members wanted question 2, 4, and 5. They're in there. But that means you're going to have to look at those, probably take 3 or 4 days, send them to Diane, and then she's got to compile them. Very happy to do that. If you do that, that's the process you need to do. If you would prefer just to look at an example of what some other boards did with their 21, I have a copy here, and I'll just give it to you and let you decide how you, or the board to decide how you choose to do that. They may be completely opposite of what you're looking for, but I wanted to give you an option of because of the time schedule, what you need to do. So, Mr. Schermeyer, if you'd like to talk to your board, I'll just step back and decide if they want to go through the process of looking through the total.
One quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you feel like their superintendent characteristics lined up with kind of where we're at?
I would say that those 2 weren't nearly as much on the financial end.
Okay.
For sure. But everybody wants an experienced superintendent, which very rarely happens anymore. But right. Everybody's looking for that, which you were, which kind of indicates somebody that knows how to run school. Yeah. The two I chose, it's public. I asked Lakin to send me there, and Hillsborough has to send their questions.
So, and I don't know how many questions are in the manual for it.
I think there's
for like budget questions. There's one listed in this 21.
And if you don't feel the budget and finance is highlighted enough, you could get rid of 2 questions and make sure they get in there too.
For me, I could go either way, but I feel like it's probably a good idea if we spend the time and go through our questions. We wouldn't be able to spend a week to do it. But then, and some of these questions, obviously are going to be on there anyway. Why are you interested in the position? As you look at the position, what do you consider to be your greatest strengths and challenges? How does the superintendent ensure that the curriculum and instruction happening within the school district is meeting student needs? I think the majority of them are going to be probably what we choose. But I hate to miss those specifics if we should.
I think it would be a good idea. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to really take a lot of time and mull it over, but I think it would be wise for each of us to at least take take the time to look through it and highlight what we feel
Is Diane on vacation or
is
is
a
she'll be back
showing
this week?
instead of this.
Mrs. Osner informed me that Diane just couldn't be here tonight, but she's not on vacation, so she would be available this next week if you had it to her by a certain time to get it collated.
How soon do you need them?
I don't.
Okay,
It goes, what I would recommend that you would send them to your clerk, your 21. She'd go through all of them, tally them, and then she would put that together for you, is the way it works. She's just not here to hear that explanation, so I would try to contact her tomorrow. So usually if the clerk's here, I say, when do you need them? You know, tell the board when you need them so that
As soon as possible, 'cause
she can get it done in time for your next meeting.
I mean, if we did, is it unreasonable to ask the board by Monday to have the questions that you want? If by
By the end of the day,
board meeting on
Monday.
Is everybody okay with that? Okay, so we'll just do that.
Okay.
Just didn't, so we get them to Diane before the board meeting
So those questions are in the back of the manual?
in the manual. yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I will send an electronic version to Diane first thing tomorrow morning. That way she can forward you the electronics. So if you want that, it's easier for you. For some of you, it may be easier just to do it that way.
We just need 3,
21 questions for each board member, yeah.
and then you compile them and then.
And then when the 21, then usually we let the board clerk, and if you're okay with this, because we think every board member should ask questions, not just the board president. Everybody okay with that? Then I'll ask Diane just to assign names. That way when you see the questions, you know the 3 that you're responsible for before you get there. So you're not looking at it for the first and being surprised at the questions. Or if there's a hard word, I'm thinking, I'm lying a little bit, but you can prepare yourself.
Do we need to come up with follow-up questions for those questions?
I wouldn't too much unless you ask the same follow-up of every candidate.
Okay.
Now, I do know that some questions will require follow-up because you want clarification. But if you have too many follow-up questions, you don't get to your all 21 and then you're ended up not having the same comparison of each candidate. So try to be as consistent, but I also understand that things can take you offline a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know how to do the questions. So the next thing is, we would recommend that if you have an interview, that you obviously have a formal interview in the evening, and that you would have a dinner with them. They can tell you more when they are breaking bread with you than they might be able to during the interview. That's the informal. Well, it's going to be pretty formal to them because they're nervous as heck. But that might be at 5:30 if you choose to do that. So the interview days, the board only has to be there in the evening. Now, if you have 3 interviews, I hope you do, it's a hard week on you, but it's only evening. So you're not missing work, hopefully, unless you have night shift or something. Typically we would have you do the following, but without school, it's going to be a little different. Whether you have school or not, we think there should be a tour of your communities and of your buildings. And because you're quite a ways away, that tour may be longer than a typical tour. Your buildings won't have the soul that they normally have because they're not going to see the life of the kids in here. But I think it's important for them to see your buildings. So they need to go into all of your communities. Now, all of them, when I say all of them, the board needs to make a decision. Do they go into Bushen and Lorraine? I mean, that's a decision. Is it something you need to show them, or you definitely need to have them go to Claflin and Wilson because that's where your 2 buildings are. But that's a decision you as a board need to decide. What's the tour going to look like? When you drive around Claflin and Wilson, I'm going to make an assumption those 2 for sure, it's just not a willy-nilly tour. You're just not driving around like I do on Saturday nights with an ice cream cone through town. You're driving to make sure they see any recreation areas, parks, swimming pools, anything because if they happen to have children, they want to know about those things. You might drive by the churches. Now, I'm not saying what church you want me to drive by, and you're not even telling me you're driving by the churches, but you're driving by the churches because they might ask, hey, is there a Presbyterian church? Oh, absolutely. Let me drive you there. Or no, there's not, but there's one 5 miles down the road or something, whatever. So whoever's going to give that tour And that's another board decision, and we would recommend it not be a board member. Could be a clerk, could be an outgoing superintendent, could be a principal, whoever you wish it to be. The principals are usually the tour guide of the buildings, but it doesn't have to be. It's whatever you choose it to be. The reason we ask it not, or recommend not a board member, is because then that board member now has a favorite because they got to spend 2 extra hours than everybody else did. So you want everything to be as consistent as you possibly can. One thing that we would recommend if it was during the school day or year is a meet and greet with the staff. And that's just a meet and greet. It's a 30-minute deal where they get to stand up and say, I'm Gary Sechrist, this is my wife Barb, I'm the superintendent at whatever, here's my dreams and aspirations for your district, and it's pretty much done. With school not in session, that's a decision you're going to have to make. Because if you have 3 people show up, that may not be a real good look. So that's something you have to consider. So I say the tour and the dinner are for sures. You might wish, and we would suggest on a normal interview date, that you would give them an opportunity to meet with the principals and the central office staff. So Diane, your treasurer, Jane, Toby, and I know you don't have a principal at Wilson, but if you would, so usually they can meet together, so that 4 or 5, 30-minute, once again, it's a meet and greet, just talk and get to know each other, get a general feel. So if the dinner starts at 5:30, that's the time we can say we know is on the schedule. And then you have to decide what you want to do before that. So the tours, for sure, meeting with the principals and office staff. You need to decide if you want the teachers to do that, but then count back from 5:30, since that's when you know it's going to be. If I come on the 20th, and I hope I get to come, that you have candidates, then we'll talk about what the phone calls would look like that night, and then you would offer a motel or a hotel, a lodging of some sort. Because if they're coming in from 200 miles and the interview concludes at 9, it's nice to offer them a hotel. So I'll leave it up to this board what kind of lodging you may have in one of your communities. The smaller communities that don't have hotels, unfortunately, they sometimes look at adjoining communities depending on what direction they're coming from. Honestly, if they're coming from the east, an hour to Salina, at least it's on their way home. But Airbnbs, hunting lodges, a lot of times are very good. And I don't know your communities like you do, but there might something you need to think about in advance. So I don't need to be here while you're talking about what you're going to do. I've given you your suggestions. And I'll call Diane. We assume she'll be back on duty tomorrow. I'll talk to her. You guys might have to let her know that, hey, we want you to get a motel room reserved so she can get that reserved for potential. I counsel it without, at least you'll know on the 20th whether you need it or not. And then if you're going to have a meal catered, is the school district going to do it? Usually the interviews, I don't want to say usually, it's becoming more common that it's a catered meal and they do it at the exact location of where the interview is going to be. So the meal comes in, you're done, 15-minute recess, everybody cleans up, everybody restroom, clean up, come back in the same location so you don't have to travel between the meal and the dinner. But once again, if you wish to, it's your choice. It's no right or wrong. It's just more convenient to do it in the same room. And the next visit, I will guide you. I won't tell you how much you should offer. That would be something that you want to consider. If you get a full-time superintendent, I would recommend probably sometime tonight that you decide on a salary range. So you know what you're currently paying. And I'm going to throw a range, but it's not. In fact, I'm going to make the range so strange, I'm faking it. So I don't want you to think I'm giving you a suggestion. That we're willing to pay anywhere from $50,000 to $58,000. I know you are, but it's not going to get, so you got an $8,000 range, right? Reason I'm asking you to come up with that now, if you have 3 interviews and you have a hot candidate that last interview and you haven't talked about that can lead to you saying, let's offer 65. And then next morning go, what the heck, we offered 65? What were we thinking? More realistic, it could be 140, you know what I'm saying? but have that range. But when we make the phone calls, we'll talk about it, that Mr. Schiermeyer has a little bit of wiggle room, so when he offers 56.5, because that's within your range, and they say, man, I can't come for that, I'm already making 54. If you can make that 60, I'm your man or woman, and he has the autonomy to say, yeah, that's it. Because if he says, oh, I got to get back with the board, guess what? You just lost him, especially at this time of the year. So you might want to think about a range. I don't know if that'd take you too long. You know what you're currently paying, so think about a range before you get too far into this. The Schiermeyer, that's all I had. I'm hoping I get to see you on the 20th. Hopefully you'll talk to an interim. I know there's somebody right behind me. And just have a nice conversation and see if the both of you like each other and what kind of terms that you think is appropriate for an interim superintendent. And that way, if you get a hot candidate, it makes you feel a little better. And if unfortunately you don't, you have a backup plan.
That's good.
How realistic here are you that you'll have range on the 20th?
Also, I've got 2 other searches, so I know what's going on with those. But you just never know. You just never know. And usually it's going to be an out-of-state person, which a little bit scares me. Why are you coming up here from out of state? But that's why I call and I vet for you.
Well, thank you for your time.
You bet, you bet. And obviously, please call if you have any questions.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to leave a note to Diane that I'll call her tomorrow, make sure she understands what's going on. Good luck to you.
Thank
Hope
you
to
so
see you on the
much.
20th. You bet.
Appreciate it. So we want to continue this discussion with
Yeah, I think that was probably good.
I think it's the latter. Okay.
Mr. President, I move that the board go into executive session pursuant to the Kansas Open Meetings Act to discuss confidential personnel matters related to non-elected personnel as they relate to the superintendent's position, and that we return to open session in this room at 8 o'clock with John Sherman and Bill Lowry to be in attendance.
Motion on the table, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor, raise your hand.
Was that true?
No, it was Alex.
No,
I'll
Allison.
make the motion. Damn.
Tim. Allison,
I don't, maybe you don't have it on the agenda to take it.
Yeah, it is, but it's down there later. so
There we go,
yeah,
yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's later.
Put it out of order.
All right, we are back in open session. Continue our discussion on the superintendent position.
I would like to make a motion that the board enter into agreements and negotiations with Mr. Lowry to act as interim superintendent.
Motion on the table, is there a second?
Second. Can you restate that?
That the board enter into negotiations with Bill Lowry to act as interim superintendent and his LLC, and I need to, and Education First LLC Consulting.
Second by Allison. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes.
Right, can I ask a quick question, just for clarification purposes? That this guy will do a search for you for an interim?
No, we would go into negotiations with him to be the interim.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood.
Okay. So we'll move into board discussion on the principal position at Wilson. So we had discussed before about what we wanted to do with that position, if we wanted to fill it, or if we wanted to have an interim, or if we wanted to have shared responsibilities between the superintendent and teachers. With the changes with Mr. Clark putting in his resignation and us having either a new superintendent or an interim superintendent, I think that we probably should pursue filling that position. At least that's my opinion.
I would agree with that.
Me too.
Well, I know it's been-
Mr. President, I move that the board go into executive session pursuant to the Kansas Open Meetings Act to discuss confidential personnel matters related to non-elected personnel as they relate to the principal's position at Wilson. And that we return to open session in this room at 8:25 with John Sherman to be in attendance.
There's a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Allison, all in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes. We are back in open session. Any further discussion for the principal position of this? Hearing none. I think we covered everything on here. Yes. Okay. Well, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Chad. Second by Josh. All in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes. Thanks, everybody.
Good questions for Monday.
Oh, yes.
Hey Brad, where's that Lowry guy from?